So now that we've covered the basics of biochemistry, let's talk about the heart of it, macromolecules. And for each one, I want you to pay attention to the element involved, the building block, the polymer, and the function. And we have 4 classes of macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And for this, I'm going to move kind of quickly because this is going to be what our activity is based on in class, is working with macromolecules. So carbohydrates, these are our energy sources. They're made of carbons, oxygens, and hydrogens. The structural unit here is a monosaccharide or a simple sugar. Classic example there is glucose. And when we build them together, we can create things like disaccharides, which are 2 monosaccharides put together, or polysaccharides, which are long chains. Classic example of a disaccharide is sucrose, which is in a lot of food. And then polysaccharides are things like starch and glycogen, which are good to store energy in. Now, I like to remember the shape of carbohydrates based on the fact that they look like Fruit Loops. So simple sugar forms a loop, Fruit Loops full of sugar. Now, you're not going to need to draw these structures, but you will need to recognize them. So simple sugar is a monosaccharide. We got a disaccharide, 2 loops here, and a polysaccharide, a long chain of loops. So the monomer is a monosaccharide. The polymer is a polysaccharide. Lipids are the macromolecule that don't really fit into the normal categories. So we're not going to be talking about a monomer or a polymer with lipids. I apologize. We can talk about what they do. So lipids also have carbons, but they have a lot more hydrogens than oxygens. And lipids are insoluble in water. So if you put oil in water, right, they're going to separate. They're going to form 2 layers. They're made of things like triglycerides, which are either saturated or unsaturated, phospholipids, which form our membranes, or steroids, which are also important for membranes, but are better known as hormones. So triglycerides provide our energy. This is the classic example of a triglyceride. You have a glycerol molecule with 3 fatty acid chains. And you can recognize the fatty acid chain because they're just a long chain of carbons with hydrogens, so CH2s all together. And they come in 2 forms. Saturated have no double bonds. They're saturated, they're filled to the brim with hydrogens. They can't get any more hydrogens. And these are solid at room temperature. And they're solid at room temperature because these chains can get really close together. So these are things like butter and lard, right? The things that are solid at room temperature. Things that are liquid at room temperature are unsaturated. So they have this kink formed by a double bond that allows them to take up more space, making them liquid at room temperature. Things like olive oil or canola oil, for example. Phospholipids are another kind of lipid. Then they form membranes. They have a similar structure to triglyceride. They have this glycerol group. They have fatty acid chains, but they only have 2 fatty acid chains. Attached to the last carbon in glycerol for a phospholipid is a polar phosphorus-containing head group. So that means there's a charge here. And these are important for membranes, which we'll talk about when we talk about the cell. Steroids are a last kind of lipid we're going to talk about. And these are things like hormones and cholesterol. And they've got this interesting 4-ring structure. Okay, so that was lipids. We've talked about sugars, talked about lipids. Let's talk about proteins. Proteins do the work of the cell. So these have carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, but uniquely have nitrogen and sulfur. And the structural unit for a protein is an amino acid. So they're made of chains of amino acids that form a polypeptide chain. For proteins, the structure is super important here. So a primary level of structure is just going to be the polypeptide chain of amino acids. For secondary, those polypeptides are going to form shapes. They're either going to twist into a helix or fold into a sheet. They can come together with other polypeptides to form that protein structure, the tertiary structure, either fibrous or globular, for example. And sometimes proteins all work together, and so we call that the quaternary level of structure, the 4th level. This is what the amino acid looks like. They've got a standard amine and an acid. This is a carboxylic acid group. And the interesting thing about amino acids is this R group is what varies. So every single amino acid, there are 20 of them, they're going to have their own different R group that's going to give it its own fun chemistry. And again, this is showing you those levels of structure. So primary structure, the chain of amino acids. Secondary structure, those polypeptide chains are going to fold into either helices or beta sheets. They'll come together to form a protein with a tertiary structure, right? All mingled together, and they can work with other proteins to create a quaternary structure. And again, that overall structure can be fibrous, long and skinny, or globular. A specific type of proteins are enzymes, and enzymes are important because they're biological catalysts. And what that means is they speed up the reactions in the body. So substrates can come in, they'll form a complex, and then they can release the product. And the important thing for enzymes is that they're not changed in the course of this reaction. So you start with one enzyme, it'll do work, and it will go back to its original shape where it's ready to do more work. So you can reuse your enzymes over and over again. Okay, this is breaking it down again. Enzyme substrate complex, forming the product. The last kind of macromolecule are nucleic acids, and these are the building blocks of the genetic code. They have carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, but interestingly, they have phosphorus. The structural unit here, the monomer, is a nucleotide, the polymer is an oligonucleotide, and the two major classes we're going to talk about are DNA, which forms our genetic code, and RNA, which carries out the orders. And it's important to know that DNA and RNA are different from each other. They're different in terms of sugars. The DNA is a deoxyribose, whereas the RNA is a ribose. Location, DNA stays in the nucleus, whereas RNA moves all around. And stability, DNA, super stable, going to last your whole life. RNA, pretty short-lived, going to break down. And that's because the DNA is double-stranded, whereas the RNA is single-stranded. This is the structure of a DNA. Again, we've got that deoxyribose sugar, that phosphate, that nitrogenous base, shown here is adenine. And they form a double helix with 4 different nitrogenous bases: thymine, adenine, cytosine, and guanine. Thymine and adenine go together, cytosine and guanine go together. A double helix. Now, related to our nucleic acids is an important molecule called ATP, which is the cellular energy currency. And ATP has that nitrogenous base with a ribose sugar, like RNA, but it has these high energy phosphate groups. So it's got 3 phosphates together with high energy bonds. I want you to try and think about for a minute, why are these bonds high energy bonds? Why does it take so much energy to keep these phosphate groups close together? Why does it take so much energy to keep these phosphate groups close together? Well, when that bond is broken, it's going to release a ton of energy. So when we go from ATP, triphosphate, to ADP, diphosphate, we're going to get a lot of energy in return. And that's going to do a bunch of cellular work, things like chemical work to drive chemical reactions, transport work to move things through the cell, mechanical work to contract our muscles, a whole host of things. So we talked in this video about the macromolecules of the body, and we'll pick up with macromolecules in class with an activity, whether that's in person or virtual.